Great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's session, Mapping and Coordinating the Food System, National Insights and Maine's Local Food Switchboard. I'm Alita Peterson. I'm the coordinator of the Maine Farm and CETA Institution Network. I'm a network partner with the Maine Food Convergence Project, and I'm also a research consultant with the Local Food Switchboard and your moderator for this afternoon. I just want to take a second to thank everybody for being here. We know that there is a lot going on in our food system work right now. So making space and time for this kind of connection and shared learning and big picture thinking is no small feat. And I really appreciate everyone's time and commitment to that. So we have put together this really awesome panel of leaders who are working at the intersection of food systems mapping, coordination, and supply chain innovation, each with lessons learned from across the country that we think that Maine can really learn from and benefit from. So I will introduce them briefly in just a moment, but before I do, want to give just a sort of an overview of what we're up to this afternoon together. So this session is really rooted in this shared recognition that our local and regional food systems are chock full of potential, but also can be really fragmented. You know, we see producers who have product and no way to process that product. We see schools and other institutions who may have funds to buy local food, but no way to access that food efficiently. Cold storage sites sit unused while nearby farms struggle with spoilage. We see, data being collected and then disappearing or going out of date, or that data isn't shared widely. So the projects that you're going to hear about today, including the Local Food Switchboard here in Maine, are all trying to resolve some of those problems that we see in the local food system by creating tools and platforms that build relationships, that really highlight the assets that support our local food, and help us all make smarter and more equitable decisions about food systems investments. So our aim is not necessarily just to build better maps, although this crowd loves a good map. But we're also here to build a more useful and inclusive, and sustainable infrastructure, both social infrastructure, digital and physical, that really helps food flow through the local food system. So we're going to start with some short introductions from all of our panelists, and they're going to review the projects that they're working on, what inspired those projects, who it serves, what they've learned from them, and then we'll move into a deeper discussion guided by some key questions for our panelists to dig into. And then after that, I'll share a short overview of the Local Food Switchboard, where we're at in our research and design process here in Maine, and want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for discussion and question and answer with all of the panelists. So with that, I am thrilled to introduce our panelists. We have Dawn Thalami. Did I say it right? We have Dawn, who is here with Colorado in their food system, working on a variety of different projects that she's going to tell you more about. We have Jake Claro. He is the Farm to Plate Director at Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. And we also have Josh Stoll with the Local Catch Network. So Dawn, let's start with you. Do you want to introduce yourself and share a brief overview of the work that you have been involved in Colorado? And then I think we'll go Jake and then Josh.
Yeah, my name is Dawn Thalami. I'm in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics here at Colorado State University, but very early on in my career took on an extension role as well and helped us develop our food systems team, which didn't exist more than 20 years ago. And it's been really, although I can talk about Colorado today, it's been an evolution, and some of it actually has taken on national scale because of some partnerships. But we started by just always, as you guys probably find, having people ask us if we could put together data and maps and reports that they needed for grants or for county commissioners and so forth. So we had done a number of assessments that were pretty much an old school version of such things, and I think just in the last decade we decided to kind of take it on as a more serious effort, and mapping platforms, quite honestly, have just become more uh, available overall. So where we are right now is that under the auspices of a actually COVID project with the USDA Ag Marketing Service, which a few other partners were involved in, including Josh on the call, it started out as a response, but by the end, one of the resource asks from the community of practice, local and regional food supply chain stakeholders, was some kind of mapping platform. Some people have been playing around with Market Maker. We had also been involved in that in Colorado. But there was far less, at least in our state, interest in doing it as a commerce website as to be an informational and connecting website. So under the auspices of the COVID project, and with the government support, we have something called the Fame Explorer, which was made available, and they just did a webinar on in this last month. But we decided as a state that we have the capacity to add a few layers, because one of the principles of the federal one, the Fame Explorer, and I can put a link in the site, is it had to be something that was a level playing field. If we could do it for one state, we had to do it for all the states. So that actually was great because we have it nationwide, but it's limiting because some states might have had more information than others. So we actually have our own version, and the spirit on that was really Becca Jablonski, my colleague. But we have added layers to that, and so that'll be one of the discussion points I'll bring up later, is the pros and cons of adding layers, because people want them, but they don't understand the complexity of that. So we now have our own map for Colorado, and somewhere in between that, I now also have been fortunate enough to help lead one of the regional food business centers for the Northwest and Rocky Mountain. For the 6-state region, we've now got mapping platforms that, again, are a little further along than Fame, but haven't had the time to grow the extra data layers that we might want to add at the request of our things. So we are Colorado, but because of USDA support, we grew into a more national effort, and I can talk about that too. But then we came back to Colorado, where we knew our social capital and our understanding of the context for the state helped us understand how to make the map better for what our folks wanted. But we can also talk about that and the sustainability of these too, because again, there's pros and cons of working with the federal government on making your resources, and we can talk about those. But one of them is likely more sustainability. So that's our journey of making maps. Again, I'll share some of those links, and then we can talk more about some of the details I hinted towards later.
Sounds great. Thank you, Dawn. Jake, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and your project?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Jake Claro, as was mentioned, Farm to Plate Director at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. Farm to Plate very much is the Vermont version. You can think of it as the Vermont version of the Maine Convergence project. So the state has a 10-year food system plan. The legislature directed my organization, the Jobs Fund, to create that and administer it. And through that process, we created the Farm to Plate Network, which is, think of that as like the implementation entity of the plan, and we help to provide support services to the network in various ways, project management, funding, basic facilitation, things like that, administration of things. And so, our plan goes back to 2011, and then we released the second 10-year plan in 2021. So over that long period of time, we have a basic what we call our food system atlas. So we provide a service through our website where organizations, farms and food businesses, can list themselves on our website, be displayed on a map, and have a listing. And so we've had that since the launch of the network. And that's been effective for certain uses and information sharing. But as we've gotten deeper into projects and a lot of like supply chain development work, it's brought up, much more complicated questions about how do we coordinate a supply chain? How do we connect these different entities together? And how do we invest strategically? Both how do those entities invest strategically in infrastructure, in supply development and market development, but then also a lot of questions for the state and other funders for and people with investment resources, to try to best understand, how can we develop that infrastructure in efficient ways, and in ways that are going to serve the market, going to serve farms and food businesses, and also develop an efficient middle of the supply chain, whether that's processing or distribution. So all of those dynamics at play, and in the last let's say 2.5 years, we've gotten more engaged with our 6 nonprofit food hubs. So Vermont has 6 nonprofit food hubs that operate across different sort of sub-state regions, and some of them also service, act statewide as well with their services. So we have a Vermont Food Hub Collaborative that we help to coordinate and bring together. And in that work, we've been identifying a lot of questions about how do these food hubs collaborate better with their distribution services. In what ways are they perhaps introducing inefficiencies into the system, by developing distribution or infrastructure or supplier or market relations that aren't in coordination with other hubs. And they have an interest too in being more collaborative and coordinated in order to be, in order to better serve Vermont farms and food producers, and just operationally, to be more effective and efficient. So that has all led to the project that we're involved with, and it's doing what's called supply network analysis. And so you can think of this as a way to create a virtual version of a supply chain, and then to do planning and forecasting for that supply chain. So really trying to move from like a static mapping approach of just points on maps to doing a sort of scenario and planning based mapping where you can pose certain questions to that spatial data, and it can provide modeled outcomes to suggest where should a distribution facility be, or a cross dock, or potentially shared storage for producers. So it has a kind of dynamic element. And I'll just show an image that kind of gives a real world example of what we're aiming for. And there's a lot of complications around this that we can share in further discussion. So this is there's a service called Carto. It's one of many that exist that provides this type of tool and analytic power, if you will. And on the left, so this is a representation of Publix grocery store, which is mainly down in the south of the United States. And on the left-hand side, and I know it's maybe hard to see like all the details here, but basically all you need to know is the left-hand side is their existing network of the blue dots are distribution centers, and these colored lines are their routes and delivery points to stores. And so supply network analysis, what it does is it takes the data that you provide about your existing supply chain, so those distribution centers, those routes, those stores, and then you can run analysis to say, where would the ideal locations of those distribution centers be if we wanted to reduce the number of vehicle miles of our distribution network. And that's what so the output of that is the image then on the right. And just in this scenario, there's about a 12,000 mile reduction if distribution centers are located differently. And in text, there's a website link that I can provide. That's the ideal. If you were to choose, say, the most financially feasible, what they recognized was that there's a new distribution center in this area around Tampa that would introduce the most efficiency and really alter their routing and sourcing in some fundamental ways that would deliver some real efficiency to their supply chain. So that's kind of just a touch point of what this supply network analysis is aimed to do, and a visual of how it's different from just looking at points at a map. It's really trying to analyze like the relationships of those points, and answer real questions that you may have around supply chain coordination and development. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jake. I feel like I already have so many questions, but really exciting use of that data. Excited to hear more. Josh, go for it.
All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate the invitation. As Lita said, my name is Josh Stoll. I'm faculty in the School of Marine Sciences at the University of Maine. And over almost the last 15 years, I've had the privilege of getting to help build and grow something called the Local Catch Network, which is a community of practice of people working to strengthen local and regional seafood systems. I just included a couple links here in the chat to the main webpage, as well as our seafood finder. There's sort of 4 core elements of work that our network does. It focuses on community building between those who are engaged in local and direct seafood marketing. One of the interesting motivations for this work is that there has been a big push to strengthen food systems, and seafood often gets left out of the equation, sort of treated as a commodity rather than part of our food system, like in my opinion, we should be thinking about it. We do 4 types of work: community building, so efforts to bring people together who are doing this type of work. We do a number of different TA and resource sharing activities, including a Seafood Accelerator business program and a mentorship program. We do work around raising the profile of seafood as food in the food system, and then increasingly we're doing more policy-related work to help participants in fisheries participate in food system policy discussions. I'm not going to be talking about most of that work, but the piece that I'm here today to talk about is the seafood finder that we've developed, and this is really related to the work that we've been doing to raise the profile of direct seafood and marketing and seafood as part of our food system. This has been a work in progress, and I'm really excited to talk about the evolution of the Seafood Finder. The very first version, I learned how to code a website myself, and probably built the worst map there ever was. And now we've gone through multiple iterations and have a pretty robust Seafood Finder tool. The goals of creating this platform there are 2 central goals for this work, and as I hope we can talk about some in this panel, there have been some emerging sort of outcomes that are, I think, really interesting and relevant to this conversation. So the 2 core objectives and the purpose for this map was initially to support direct to consumer sales of seafood. So there's this growing direct to consumer sales of agricultural products, and people participating in the seafood sector have started to take notice, trying to figure out how to connect to consumers. And so this platform provides an opportunity for the public for consumers to log in, find local sources of seafood. The second objective was to increase the visibility of the sector. A lot of these different initiatives, these businesses that do direct-to-consumer work, get media attention, and they're sort of held up as these sort of random acts of innovation, and that's wonderful. But to be able to zoom out and take a broader scale perspective to say, no, this is actually part of a broader movement of seafood harvesters trying to tap into local regional food systems. There's a lot of power in visualizing the spread of these businesses and their work. So those were our two core goals when we started doing this work. But there have been some really interesting kind of what I would call bonus benefits, and lots of challenges too, which we can get into. But one of the more recent outcomes and benefits of this work have related to the research potential that that comes out of this. Two examples of that is anytime somebody logs into a consumer goes onto the website and enters information, we're collecting data about search terms people are using, locations people are using. And so on the back end, we're harvesting a lot of data about consumer sort of market demand and things like that, that we can then feed back to our network to say, hey, people are Googling about salmon and they're doing this and that. And so there's data that we have access to. We have also found the platform really effective and useful for studying system dynamics. And an example of that was during the COVID pandemic early on. We saw this spike in people engaging with our system. And so being able to track how consumers are engaging with direct to consumer businesses in the seafood sector has been really quite interesting. We published a paper on some of that work a couple years ago. So those are some of that's one of the bonuses. The second sort of interesting outcome from this work that I hope we can get into is that we have heard anecdotally that the platform is now also becoming a tool for business to business collaboration and exchange, where we have seafood companies in the network who have a point on the map. They're going onto the site and looking for other businesses that sell complementary types of seafood and then making a connection and doing business exchange with them. So I think that's an interesting sort of form of collaboration that is coming out of this work. So I'll stop there to say, looking forward to this conversation. I see our work more than anything about community building, but mapping is clearly part of it.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, really respect that perspective. I'm glad to have you on this panel, bringing the seafood lens to the equation. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dawn and Jake, as well. It's really awesome to hear how you all are working to tackle some of these issues from different angles. So yeah, let's get into the meat of our conversation here with some panel questions. We probably won't get to all the guiding questions that I have lined up, but I really have them in my back pocket to spark conversation and reflection. So I will direct the first couple questions to specific panelists, but after that, absolutely feel free, panelists, to jump in, and if someone else has sparked a reflection or something that you want to share about your project, please get right in there. We don't need all panelists to answer all questions. We're really aiming for depth and connection over breadth here. And for our audience, as you listen to these folks and questions or reflections come up, feel free to jot them down, pop them in the chat. If they're quick clarifying questions, we'll try and make sure that they're addressed quickly. Juliana, if you want to keep an eye on that would be great. And otherwise, we'll definitely save room for lots of discussion with our whole audience at the end. All right. So let's start with this question. I'd love to know what inspired your mapping project, and what gap or challenge were you trying to address when you got started? Jake, you spoke to this a little bit, but why don't we start with you, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. And the one of the things that I forgot to mention is that the project that I'm engaged with just started in February. So we're in very nascent stages, and it's a project that is in collaboration with the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships at the University of Vermont. So that's where the funding is coming from, and we are relying on the expertise of UVM has a spatial analysis lab that's providing the mapping services and tools and expertise for the project. So yeah, I think just to reiterate that we've had a lot of great development with our food hubs in the state, and in a lot of ways they are serving a big gap in our distribution system, as we've seen a lot of consolidation in distribution over time. And then also within Vermont, one of our major private distributors was bought by Reinhardt and then Performance Food Group. And PFG is the third largest distributor in the country. And with that came a lot of loss of services that were really essential for small, medium-scaled farm and food businesses, particularly in providing freight services for those producers. And so with those shifts, the services of the food hubs have become more and more essential and important for market access. And so, as they're growing and their systems are becoming more sophisticated, or the need for more sophistication is needed to manage their supply chains and the complexity of the relationships they have within their own food hub, but also now as the food hubs are looking at food hub to food hub transactions, because they offer different services, they have access to different markets and producers. There's just a greater need to, I think, provide them with tools that can help them, manage these supply chains, develop them, and also maintain viability operationally. The funding environment is changing, as we know, and also just philanthropy in general is, it's hard to sustain funding for one type of initiative or project. And so oftentimes, now that the food hubs have infrastructure that's been funded, the question becomes, how do they, operate that sustainably over time with maybe less, say, philanthropic funds. So, so the intent and impetus for this was very much to, give them better tools to manage their supply chains, to find better partnerships and collaborative opportunities, and to also plan as a collaborative of food hubs and communicate what their future investment needs may be. So it's another way also for us to approach the state to say, in order to help provide market access, we are going to need 4 new, cross docks or we're going to need a distribution center in the southern part of the state. And so it gives us just, a better ability to forecast and communicate what these investment needs are for the system to work better. And so all of those dynamics working together, like the individual hub enterprise scale to the collaborative of hubs, to then also just thinking of like the important role that they provide collectively to the system from a distribution and middle of the supply chain perspective, was what kind of gave us the impetus to investigate tools and methods like this supply chain supply network analysis approach.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, seems like multi-use of that platform. Dawn or Josh, did you want to jump in and speak to what kind of gaps or problems you were trying to address with your projects?
Well, I think in our case, we're not currently looking at commercial applications, but Josh raised some interesting questions that make me think about this harder. But when we talk about underserved, there's so many ways it can be underserved, but because I also wear an economic development hat at CSU, it's this idea that, you know, in the bigger towns and cities along our urban corridor on I-25, they have full-blown economic development and community development staffs. So when they need to put together reports or prospectuses and stuff, it's easy, you know. But we have the majority of our rural counties, and some of our rural counties have as few as 1,200 people. If they have one staff person, they're lucky. And who we actually did a poll on this, and the majority of the economic development staff people are not economists, they're social scientists who are there for relationship building. And so when we thought of underserved, it was these shops that don't have the depth in their bench to actually put some of these reports together, and what we could do and create so that stuff was easy and handy. It mimics what our demographer's office in our state has done for a lot of the data that's more commonly out of a demographer's office. So it was actually just trying to fill an informational gap, because information is so important now as people are trying to think strategically about what they want to do, or recruit people with information about what their community is like. Or, you know, Jake and Josh had me realize, yeah, I guess we de facto are doing almost baby needs assessments, because as soon as you map something and you see differential colors in your heat maps and stuff, you're basically telling people what they're short on. So, you know, it came from wanting to fill that typical traditional extension outreach engagement gap of like, what can we do for communities that levels the playing field. But then, yeah, I guess some of the layers we've ended up adding have been specifically because people needed market intelligence, and we can basically somewhat crowdsource it, somewhat, you know, source it from government licenses and stuff with FOIA and stuff, which is a step a usual producer wouldn't want to take. So a lot of it is just trying to be that facilitator of amassing things in a streamlined, efficient way, so a bunch of individual agents don't have to do it, and just doing it once for the team.
I can share too, and I actually am going to share my screen if that's okay. Just to show a couple slides, because I think it helps make my point. You know, so this question of what was the gap and what were we trying to fill in doing this? I love sharing this figure. This is something called the Fish Stock Sustainability Index, which is like the Dow Jones of fisheries. You don't need to know the indicators that go behind this. That's for a different class. But if basically when it goes up, it's good, and when it goes down, it's bad. And this is what NOAA is required to report to Congress on an annual basis, to say, how are our fisheries doing? And if you look at this, they answered pretty good. It's going up. And so like things are in good shape. We can pat ourselves on the back and say, you know, good job us, and we can go home and call it good. But for many communities, they're experiencing a very, very, very different reality. And this is a picture from down east North Carolina, where I spent a lot of time working with the fishing community there doing direct seafood marketing. And I love that juxtaposition, because I think whether you're in down east North Carolina or down east Maine, where I'm from, or here out in Oregon, where I'm sitting today, like many fishing communities, many small scale seafood businesses are facing a very different reality than that. Like things are heading in the right direction. And as a result of that, we have a lot of small scale seafood companies pivoting to local and direct marketing of seafood as a way to find a different path forward. The problem with that is it requires a whole new set of skills, a whole new set of resources, a whole new set of technology. And the reason the Local Catch Network came to be is out of personal desire. This is a picture of a seafood direct marketing company that we worked with. And people from all over reached out to say, how did you do that? And it wasn't about how do you get North Carolina seafood? It was like, how do you create these new models of doing business that reconnect consumers to their seafood systems? And that was the aha moment behind this work of like, there's a need for connecting people across place. And as part of that, it's really valuable to put those physically on a map. And a lot of other things have come out of that since then. But like at like the motivation, the starting point for this was this recognition that there's a pretty big disconnect between sort of like this national perspective on how our seafood systems are doing and what a lot of communities are dealing with. And in order for those small businesses to survive and thrive, there's a need for a community of people who are sharing knowledge, sharing information, and creating visibility to this sector.
So important. Yeah, I love that you're lifting up that that disconnect and then the need to do a better job at supporting those small scale fishermen directly. To that end, I'm curious from you all who the main users or beneficiaries of your tool are and how they are using it or how you hope that they will use it. And also, what steps have you taken to ensure that your tool really reflects the actual needs and perspectives of users who are often overlooked or marginalized, and how do you stay accountable to those users? So multi-pronged question. Feel free to respond to any parts of that resonate with you. Anybody want to kick us off?
Well, let's start talking about the challenges then, because I think what's great is that it is something that demystifies data and and a great for visual thinkers who don't want everything to be words. Maps are just great to visualize, particularly differences across places and so forth. I would say two things that I would talk to anybody about who is thinking of developing a mapping platform are, though, that what is your scope and what are you going to do about mission creep? Because two things, everybody wants more. And the problem is there is so much data out there. And some of it is better quality than others. Some of it is public, some of it's proprietary. And I think we're going to see the monetization of a lot more data going forward. And I think it's only going to get worse. Now, universities are in a good position, as some nonprofits are, to perhaps get access to that cheaper than a business would. So maybe we can play an intermediary role. But the other thing is one solution is then crowdsourcing and using our social capital and so forth. But crowdsourcing itself has some validation and credibility issues. And so I think what we didn't even think about enough is what is the scope? How are we going to manage mission creep when people want more, as they tend to want to do? And then that sustainability thing of like data gets old fast. And so what is the update plan? So I think that's at least one thing. Even though you asked about how does this benefit people, I kind of flipped it on like, well, let them tell you what they need for benefits and then scope it appropriately. So you then could say, well, the reason we scoped it this way is this what you said you needed. And yeah, I'm sure that did update. But I think the other thing I would say is that researchers at universities are infamous because we get so hit over the head about replicability, credibility, and data validation. We maybe are a little too firm about what we think needs to be done to say data is clean and true and right and representative. And I don't know if we've done a lot of discovery about what's good enough. So perhaps we are striving for the perfect and the validation so fully, we constrain how flexible these maps can be. Industry runs a lot looser, but partly because they're not ever looked to as the elements of truth. So I think it's also kind of figuring out where is the right spot for those of us doing engagement and outreach in this space to be credible, but not paralyzed by perfection.
Yeah, that's really good, Don. I feel like let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good is a motto that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah, a lot that Don said resonates for me. And and there's a big difference between the project that I'm sharing information about and the sort of food system map that I alluded to, which is open source, and you know, any entity can enter themselves into that database and be shown in that map. But yeah, with that map is very limited, but that's because adding additional content becomes very expensive, and you know, so yeah, we've always struggled with that of you know, how many resources should we dedicate to that map and for what users. And so the basic approach to that has always been, it's like a very low barrier to entry to be included, and that it's you know, that information is accessible by anyone. So it oftentimes has been used by like researchers or towns that are looking to do like asset mapping, you know, or it's been downloaded and utilized and manipulated in different ways for other projects. So we've kind of intentionally like made it easy to enter data into, but we haven't you know, dedicated a lot to you know, there probably are a lot of errors in listings or old entries, and you know, and all of those things, and that just becomes an issue of capacity to keep it up to date. But that doesn't negate, you know, I think people are better off having that information than having nothing at all. So that's like this question of, you know, what is good enough and what are you comfortable with from like an accuracy and integrity standpoint. And then the supply network analysis project is much more narrow, you know, to right now it's for 6 food hub organizations. And in a lot of ways we are testing this approach because that type of analytical tool has traditionally been used by large like distribution logistics companies or very vertically integrated or multinational companies with global supply chains. So we are navigating right now this idea of, you know, how do you bring powerful analytical mapping tools to small organizations or stakeholder groups, and not overload them, because the data intensity of this kind of tool is very high. But yeah, also how do you do something like this with a vision for what other applications can we provide or apply this to in the future that's not just for, you know, these 6 food hubs. And that's something we're kind of actively exploring as this project unfolds. And you know, we have sort of ideas for what that might entail of, you know, are there industry groups or farmer groups, you know, that have certain supply chain coordination questions that we could apply this type of analysis to. So there's a lot of future use case scenarios, and there's also, with the food hubs, we've even discussed like equity components of, you know, how is their decision making either addressing or leaving certain communities behind, or how is it actually providing greater service to them in ways that, you know, that we're not publicly recognizing or funders aren't recognizing, you know, that there's a real kind of community and service value from an equity standpoint. So there's a lot of ways I think that this like spatial analysis can unlock some interesting analysis and insights around questions of equity, and certain, you know, marginalized communities and people. So yeah, those are all very like active questions that we're exploring in this process, because this is a very new type of approach for myself and for the food hubs, and just you know, so there's a lot of things we're uncovering along the way, which is also hard when you only have like a year of a project term to try to dig into some really important questions, and that have really big impacts. Yeah.
So interesting translating that that technology that's used by those big corporations to serve these food hubs. And I imagine that once that is all laid out on the map, it is pretty easy to see where the gaps are in serving underserved areas.
Yeah, and yeah, one other component too, I think is we've talked about with like disaster
Right.
an emergency response. So there's a lot of ways where this could provide valuable insight for the hubs and others and other food security groups that in times of extreme need and when infrastructure might be down or damaged, how do you coordinate responses to still get food to where it needs to get to, and and potentially understand like what communities may be more impacted by a flooding event, from a transportation or food access standpoint, and how can you create a response around that with a tool like this?
Yeah, will only become more and more important.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some of these challenges, you guys. I would love to hear from, let's start with Josh. What challenges did you face in data collection or design or adoption? And how did you overcome them or are addressing them right now?
What challenges? No, just kidding.
It's all easy.
Um, Many challenges along the way. I I think as I said in sort of my setup, this has been a work in progress, and I think when we started, we had something like 12 listings, and now there's over 900. So it's evolved a lot, and with that growth, there's all kinds of really interesting challenges. We've had issues with mission creep, with data quality, with the needs for updating, all these things that Jake and Don just referenced. Uh, we have also had really interesting and hard conversations about who qualifies, who is allowed to put themselves on the map. And we are not set up as a certification body. We don't have the capacity, the resources, or the interest to police. Like that's not our objective. And so how do you create a low bar, but also ensure that people are becoming members in the spirit of what this community is doing? So maybe that has been a really interesting challenge, and we've sort of overcome that, I think, in some really interesting ways. Yeah, there is a really long list of challenges. I think for me, another challenge is just the reality that the technology evolves, and there's been a lot of evolution in 10 plus years of like what is like feasible and what works and how to integrate with other systems. So an example of that is with our seafood finder, we didn't want to create a burden for businesses who already have their own websites and social media to then also have to update and maintain their site on the local catch network. And so integrating, say, with Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms, so when they post their Twitter handle or their Instagram handle, it sucks into our page. And that has worked really well, except when the various APIs change for social media platform and all of a sudden everything goes down. So like there's all kinds of learning. I think and my reflections on the challenges, like by offering sort of a hopeful thought on this, is like this is a work in progress. We're in it for the long term, and every time there's a mistake or we bump into a challenge, I think we are building systems, learning how to do things better. And if you look at the progress we've made since I personally coded a terrible website to where we are right now, it's just evolved so much. And I like have a lot of confidence that as we continue to learn more about this technology and it keeps on evolving, like the tool becomes better and better.
Jake and Don, I bet you don't have any challenges either that you want to highlight.
Well, I don't know that I have a ton to add from Josh's perspective, but again, it gets back to a scoping thing, because again, once people get a taste of what they could do with the map, they want to do it all. and you don't want to be the bad guy saying, you know, or unintentionally condescending, saying you don't understand how hard that would be to do. Or, but I also think we're constantly, as extension folks, doing research and needs assessment. And, if you keep getting that same question 10 times, that's exactly the statement you need to take to a funder to say, there's a lot of compelling interest in doing this, and it's a place to make a contribution or a mark. But, we even had the benefit for a while of being on one of these platforms alongside a government partner. Again, add some credibility. Then you can use this kind of a reasoning that, well, since we're doing it with the government, we should use certifications. They certify that, go through them, because that would be the appropriate thing to do. Whereas I guess if you're doing that with a private partner, you could do it as well. But I think I work in a public good space of academia, where although I certainly hope to support for-profit businesses, we need to stay out of the for-profit world. So, some of the things even that Jake is moving into, which is very appropriate for his organization, we cannot do. Again, trying to explain that, but there is the safety too of being back in the space that is public domain. Everybody gets free access to it and stuff, because I think the temptation is going to be to start monetizing this. And there's been some failed experiments, quite honestly, that emanated out from academia of trying to do it. And you don't, so I think we've learned our lesson. So I guess what I would tell Maine is they go down the road of figuring out what they're going to do with theirs and how they do it. It is likely you need to think about who's going to be the most consistent player staying there, and understand who they are as well. Because us academics have some constraints, government partners have constraints. Jake probably has the most flexibility of anybody on the call and can think the most creatively here. But there's also, I also think there's room for us to think about mapping platforms that can serve more than one master, I guess is how you'd play it and stuff too. But again, then you get to, well, how an economist also thinks about things, which is trade-offs of how much energy and time are you going to put into building this for the functional life it's going to have. And I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with too, because things are changing and moving so rapidly. I am old school. I probably will learn just enough about AI to spot it when my students are using it in their assignments, but probably not implement it much. The chances that these maps aren't going to have a heavy AI influence within the next 5 years is so then we're talking about, is part of our job professional development and developing some of the food system leaders in the next generation, where one of their roles is the clear wins you could have from probably doing pretty amazing data scraping from a lot of the stuff that's evolving that you can do. And again, so then are we just, what is going to be the functional life of these maps? I'm guessing 2 to 3 years, and then they're going to have to be rethought for what is the new technologically frontier pushing way people are going to want to see maps and stuff. So I think about some of this in daily problem solving, but I also think about it in the long term of like, are all the maps we're looking at right now going to look totally old school in 5 years? And I think the answer is yes. So
Yeah.
Maine, think about that and get some young professionals on your team.
Yeah, that's I think about that a lot with all of these kinds of projects, of the effort that goes into the initial baseline database. And it's like you're never gonna, you can never put that much effort in again to keep it fresh. And so you need some kind of service integration, or it's going to be AI. Like there will be other technologies I think we have to utilize to keep these resources up to date. And it's interesting, Josh, mentioned sort of really trying to think about integration to make it easy on the user. And that's like another, I think, element of there's like different points of entry for different users, and those that are providing information that you need, and those that are accessing information that they need. And there's there's two different interfaces for that. There's sort of like the back end and the front end. And I think we, a lot of times with these projects too, think a lot more about like front end design than we do about back end design. And I think that's where things are just, I just feel like things are changing so quickly. And even my work on this project I'm on now is like, I'm finding things every day that I'm like, oh my gosh, we're like so far behind, and things are moving so fast ahead of us as we're figuring things out. So it does, I think it does pose some really big questions around like management and like just like costs. How do you cost contain maintenance and sustainability over time? And automate. I think there's like APIs and automation that you have to sort of think about and consider, and that's where that sort of that area of expertise passed me by. So that's not my specialty, and bringing people kind of into the team that do have that expertise and knowledge, I think is going to be more and more essential. And I think too about this with any of these projects too is like, how well do you really understand the need or the use cases, and just being clear about like setting expectations around what the tool can actually provide, and what people still need to, through their own knowledge, expertise, and insight, need to inject into that resource. So I think sometimes there's just this expectation of this thing is going to provide me with answers, and it might actually give you just better questions to ask. And so that's, I think too, just a thing around data in general is like, I think sometimes we're seeking like the data gives us an answer, and that is not typically the case. There's still so much context and conditions around what it may be saying, or limitations about what it can actually, provide you with. So, so I think there's a big also communication component that can be challenging around when you create resources like this, that might, can change users' perceptions of like the experience they're having with it. And you don't want that to start off on like the wrong foot.
Totally. Yeah, you don't want somebody to go into the platform thinking this is going to give me all the answers to ABC, and actually it's XYZ. I can really see how mission creep happens even just with, suddenly you are tasked with being a software developer and a workforce development, it's I can see how that might happen. Well, let's do one more question for everyone. I'd love to know if you could add one major feature or solve one persistent issue in your work, what would it be and why?
The continuum of quality of data. So we in the US are completely spoiled that we have lots of really good public data. And that's mostly what I've spent my career working with. Then we have the quasi-public data, which is some of the stuff the USDA keeps, or our state. You can go find where all of your registered meat processors are by doing an ask for licenses and stuff, but it's just a little bit of effort knowing how to navigate it. Or, as universities get some subscriptions to some things that are very expensive, free. And then there's the stuff that's completely proprietary. Jake, I don't know where you got your Publix data, but I'm assuming that was proprietary. So I think we are going to see people know that there's some of the data that's so detailed and high quality and useful, but proprietary and actually can be quite costly, and that being their wish list. And us being really excited that we're bringing a lot to the table with what's publicly available and free. And again, trying to navigate, since it's not all the same, it's not all code the same, trying to come up with what are best practices for baby data in this space, and the reason I participated today is, have us all on the same page. So, and then when one of us does figure out something clever, sharing it, how both what you did and how you did it, and hope you have the same relationships in your state or county or whatever. So, yeah, the continuum of data and how much variability there is across it, and how to navigate still telling really interesting stories with data when it isn't as even as you'd hope.
I completely agree with Don on the data piece. I think I'd come at this question from a slightly different angle and thinking about like our original goals of creating this. And I think to the extent that we can create a platform that helps small scale businesses be sustainable and thrive, like that's the goal, or that's at least a central goal for the work that we're doing. And so creating a tool that allows that is top of the list for me.
Yeah, here to that. That is a major motivator in the project I'm involved in, and yeah, there's just so much now that large scale businesses, they do have the tools because they have the resources, and there's a lot of power that comes with that. And the challenge that we're trying to approach with this, and I think all these projects, is like, how do you apply that in a distributed and decentralized manner, and still have that like data integrity and sort of efficiency of like attaining and sustaining sort of the effort. So yeah, if we can solve for that, I think we'll be in a good place. And it's also too, I think, like trying to find the sweet spot of like appropriate technology, that I think like I'm facing this a lot in this project I'm involved with, of very powerful tools and analytical capabilities that actually may not be necessary for who we're working with. And parsing through that, of like, they don't have what they need, but what is available in the marketplace is also just beyond what would actually be of value to them. So we're kind of in this, I think that's what a lot of these efforts really do represent, that then is like, how do we create these appropriate technologies? And if we can find some really novel way to sustain them with the resources they need, that's what I'm interested in figuring out.
Same here. Oh man. Don, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I just saw you come off mute. Okay. Well, thank you all so much, Josh, Jake, and Don, for sharing your perspectives on this. It's it's really interesting to see how we're all sort of grappling with these similar questions and approaching issues from different angles. How can we contain our mission and still serve the communities that we've set out to serve? How can we keep up with this tech in an ever-changing world? And how can we make sure that what we're doing is actually in service of making local food procurement easier and more efficient and accessible? So really appreciate your perspectives here on that. And in Maine, we are grappling with all these questions too. So I'm excited to share a little bit about the switchboard and how it's responding to some of these issues. So for the next 15 minutes, I'll just dig into what we're building and why it matters, and how you all can be a part of it. And then we will get into some Q&A for folks curious about the switchboard or who have questions for our other panelists. I will share my screen here. Okay. Can you guys see that okay? My big local food switchboard?
Looks great.
Okay. All right. So yes, like I said, I'm excited to share what we've been working on here in Maine to better coordinate our food system and help more local food make its way to schools and other institutions across the state. So, the Local Food Switchboard is a brand new initiative. It's funded by the USDA's School Food System Transformation Challenge through Full Plates, Full Potential. And it's part of a broader movement here to support a healthier, more equitable school meals program. The switchboard itself, really, we're seeking to support a Maine where it's easy for schools to buy from local producers, where infrastructure is shared and utilized to its maximum capacity, where producers and aggregators can find each other more easily, and where people growing and cooking food have the tools and relationships that they need to thrive here in Maine. So, right, at its core, the switchboard is all about connection. We are designing this tool to help schools and institutions and other markets procure more local food, connect producers to new markets, support the sharing of equipment, of storage, distribution. We also want to increase transparency so people know what exists out there and how to access it, and ultimately strengthen regional collaboration and investment in our food system. I'm really excited about the tool that we're building, but I think I'm even more excited about the approach that we're taking with this. Really leading with relationship building and deep listening, and trying to really ground this work in the realities of Maine's food system. The information that we're gathering as part of our research and design phase, I think, has really immense potential to, not only be a useful map, but to surface some of the bottlenecks in our food system, and highlight underutilized assets so that we can make smarter investments and unlock new opportunities across the food web here in Maine. So what will the switchboard include? We are working on building this digital platform that will house 3 main buckets of information. One bucket is really around product, so food businesses and the products that they are growing or processing. The second bucket is around infrastructure. So where are the processors, cold storage, shared kitchens, equipment, trucks, distribution, things like that. And then the third bucket is really around food systems resources. So information about technical assistance, workforce development, financial tools, things like that. And so all of this will be searchable and mapped on our platform when we finish our research. The switchboard, I think really a value add that we have is around this switchboard operator role. So if folks want to access the switchboard offerings but don't necessarily want to do so via the World Wide Web, that's where the operator really comes in. So we will be hiring a long-term dedicated role, someone who can help maintain that data on our platform, facilitate connections, and assist folks who may not be comfortable using the digital map platform. So we really want this tool to be useful for school nutrition directors and farmers and processors. And if that means, being available on the other end of a phone, we would love to meet that need. Another aspect of our project is involved in cold storage. So one infrastructure gap that we really didn't need an entire year of research and design to pinpoint was around this gap in cold storage in Maine. It's really, surfaced as a critical bottleneck for getting more local food into schools. And without adequate cold storage, producers can't hold product for institutional buyers, and schools often can't manage those bulk local purchases that are really streamline that purchasing relationship. And so a key aspect of the Switchboard project is the strategic siting and implementation of 6 different cold storage units across the state over the next 3 years. So these cold storage sites will both serve schools and producers, and be, I think, Jake, we're gonna tap into some of your resources around strategic siting when we get there. Yeah. So here's an overview of our timeline for the next 4 years. We are here in research and design land, and that will wrap up this summer. We'll get into some data collection, and then we'll do a pilot year with some close partners in school districts and others across the food system in their area to be testing and refining, working out the bugs before we go full implementation across the state in year 3. And throughout this process, but particularly in year 4, focused on sustainability, wanting to make sure that we are building a map and creating a system that will live beyond the 4-year USDA funding that we're working from right now. So just to ground us a little bit in some of the use cases where this might be, this tool might be used. The switchboard is definitely trying to do a lot of things. So this is just one example of how it may be useful. So imagine that you are a school nutrition director and you're responsible for feeding hundreds of kids, 2, sometimes 3 meals a day. And you really want to support your community by buying local food, but you just don't have the time to track down your local farmers to figure out what they have to offer, whether it's the right amount to meet your needs, whether it's within your school's budget, how to get into your school, all of that. And so the switchboard can come in and help make those connections with local farms for that nutrition provider, and provide all that information that maybe would help that food buyer skip those steps. We in Maine do not benefit from the 6 different food hubs that span the state of Vermont. We have a couple burgeoning food hubs here in Maine, but one of the aspects of the local food switchboard that we're trying to fill, one of the gaps we're trying to fill is around not having food hubs, and that is one of the services that they really provide, is this kind of vetting and connection to local farms in their in an institution's area. Another use case, so for producers, especially small or medium scale producers, it can be challenging to break into institutional markets because of mismatched scale or low capacity for processing product in institutional kitchens, rules and regulations for selling to schools and other institutions. And so the switchboard can help to navigate some of that bureaucracy and connect producers and others who have sort of figured out that system by offering some of those resources around forward contracting or other types of tips and tricks for accessing institutional markets via distribution. So yeah, the switchboard hopes to serve the small scale producer by connecting them to the resources that they seek, either to access the institutional market, or maybe they're looking for a storage facility nearby, maybe they're looking for processing, just having that open access information, transparency. We hope to reduce some of that waste that happens on the farm field and help producers use their product to its highest purpose. So where our project is at right now, as I mentioned, we're in our R&D year right now, and we are tackling research and design through several different avenues. One, our sort of like focal point is our research roadshow. So we are in the midst, we've done 4 out of 9, I believe, research roadshow events across the state. We've done one in Presque Isle, one in Skowhegan, Unity, Machias, where we're meeting with food producers, processors, school food buyers, anybody who's working in the local food system to better understand what data they want to see housed on this map. So, right, we know our sort of like main buckets of product and infrastructure and resources, but we need to drill down onto the granularity of data, and much like Don was talking about, sort of like devise our scope so that we can stick to that and make sure that what we're housing on the map is going to be useful to its end users. So we need to better understand how they're going to use the platform, be they nutrition directors or farmers or folks in between. And then make sure that what we are creating is equitable and truly serves like one of our goals, which is to help marginalized producers reach these markets that they've often been excluded from in the past. So we're doing that. We're also hosting some virtual focus groups designed around shared experience or group affinity and position in the food supply chain. We're hosting one-on-ones, sharing an online survey, just generally trying to get as much information as we can in the next couple months before we launch into the tech aspect and building our map and doing that data collection. So we have lots of different ways that you can stay involved, learn about our project, and help inform the design. We have, opportunities to join a roadshow coming to a location near you. You can fill out our interest form or survey. We have a newsletter that has monthly updates that are coming out, and want to reiterate Lauren's plug from the beginning to sign up to come to the in-person Convergence event if you are able to. That's going to be a really great chance to not only learn more about the switchboard, as we will have another session there, totally different in person, very interactive, and then just make connections in the Maine food system here. So in closing, I'll just say that we all know that we are up against a lot when it comes to the local food system and supporting local food. And I think it's often easy to get bogged down in the carrots and cold storage, if you will, but so important, I think, to keep in the forefront that what we're trying to do is to build a food system that works for all of us, where school food is nourishing and local, and where producers can thrive and have a living wage, and we're sharing infrastructure and information. And the switchboard is just getting started. So we would love to keep you in the loop and glean whatever we can from Mainers about what would be useful through this platform. So I will stop my share. Oh, there we go. And I want to open it up to questions from the audience. What are you all curious about the switchboard or from our panelists? The floor is open. I will also just mention that we're lucky to have I think, almost our whole switchboard team here today. We have an advisory team, but we also have a team of consultants. Juliana is here, Bridget is here, and I think Lucy may have had to sign off, but if you all please feel free to chime in if questions come up about the switchboard that you want to answer.
Hi, this is Marie Emerson. I'm a grower and a processor, been at it a long time. I want to congratulate those folks from Colorado and Vermont. Back in the early 90s when we were trying to get a shared use kitchen in Maine, I went and looked at there was only 5, I think, in the country then. I think only 2 survived out of that 5 back then. And since then, some have grown. So it's always good to look at successful. Vermont, of course, has done so well with shared use kitchens. And again, Vermont, for small farmers, has done so much, and they really are a leader in the nation. So thank you, Vermont, for guiding Mainers in many, many ways. I'm anxious to see the new switchboard. I know technology plays a big part. We're older farmers. We've been at it a really, really long time. My husband started at the University of Maine in 1953 in research. I started very early teaching food and nutrition at the community colleges and promoting local foods everywhere, television, books, a number of different things. I'm part of the Back to the Land movement. My husband is 12th generation Downeaster here in Maine. So I'm anxious to get involved with the switchboard. It seems like distribution has always been the issue, especially in remote areas like Washington County, Maine, to get the product to the person. And again, we've started many co-ops. We have delivered food all over the country. So we have some experience, but our experience has not been great, as mentioned earlier in one of the conversations. The large multinational corporations do you in is what happens. But maybe there's better ways with all the new technology around that. Thank you all for working so hard for the small grower.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you for paving the way for us to be doing this kind of work. And yeah, thank you to your husband as well. It was awesome to hear yesterday that he was out on the tractor, 90 years old, still doing this work. So would love to get you plugged into the switchboard going forward. I see a couple of hands up. Lynn, do you want to shoot your shot? Oh, you're muted, Lynn.
I've been around this work for a while. I come from a retail background, and I've seen hubs come and go. I've seen maps come and go. I think I've talked to Juliana about that. I'm glad to see that you're making a point to build in sustainability on the map, because that's the problem, primarily with maps. It's not making them, it's keeping them updated. But from what I've heard, you're basically going to have a broker function, a consolidator function, and a storage function. And initially, you're going to have grant funding. But how are you going to maintain those activities going forward after the grant runs out? Are you going to have a pricing? Are you going to have, is it going to be a function of, contracts like a Mainers feeding Mainers situation? Is it going to be searching out more grants? How do you envision that?
Alita, anytime you want me to jump in too, let me know.
Yeah, go for it, Annie. Do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Thanks for that question, Lynn. It is definitely one of the big questions, and one of the reasons we were really excited to get 4 years of pretty significant funding so that we can take the time and hire a team to help us figure this out. So one of we've crunched some numbers. one thing is that the storage facilities, we will put the upfront investment in and then figure out who can adopt it moving forward. And, you know, partner with them for the ongoing upkeep, hopefully, you know. And then after this 4 years of grants that we have 1.4 million for, which includes a lot of like stipends for community partners who are coming to the events to give their input and all those things. After those 4 years, it will be simplified quite a bit. So after that, most of the funding will go towards the switchboard operator, a 30 to 35 hour position and some overhead. The map will, you know, be minimal. And I would love to hear from like Jake, who's still on, Josh, who's still on, what your experience is. So this is a response and a question. So I would love to hear a little bit, maybe you already covered it, I'm not sure. But we're hoping that with this huge upfront investment, that ongoing, we were able to simplify it and not have, you know, the 300,000 a year costs to pay each year. But I would love to hear from panelists about that. I have one other thing on this maybe before we close too. Catherine Brown asked a question too that I would love to respond to and ask a question. So, but I'll stop now and see what Jake and Josh have anything to say.
I was waiting for Jake to have the silver bullet answer. That doesn't look like he was about to
Curious
give
what
it.
your response was, Josh.
Yeah, I mean the funding mechanisms for us is, you know, for the network started in a very grassroots way, and so it sort of started the opposite way of what you're describing, where it started with no money and a lot of volunteer time for many years. And it's only been the last few years that our work has actually been attracting funding, and that has been that's advice that I have shared with other people in the map creating space. Like I think there's a lot of maps, somebody mentioned that earlier, that come and go, and you know it's pretty easy to create them and hard to sustain. And I think for us, part of our sustainability, you know, we've been at it almost 15 years, has been the slow grow. I think your model, your vision is very different from ours. I'm stunned that we're still here, to be quite honest, and we're in the best shape we've ever been in. And so I think I attribute a lot of that is learning and growing slowly and building the partnerships necessary that are durable partnerships and not fully dependent on grant funding.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Josh. And one thing I left out is I envision it will be really good to have these 4 years to build those partnerships. And this project came from the processing work group, which has been around for the last 4 years, building relationships, understanding what needs to be done. And every time we're like, what needs to be done? We're like, well, we don't really know. So we need to know, which led to the Switchboard project. And some of our partnerships, we're hoping, like Maine, you know, the DACF has said, okay, this can really serve us as well. Maine Department of Education, oh, this can really serve us as well. So these partnerships where hopefully what will happen is they will not replicate their own maps, but will partner with us and support this map moving forward. So that is the hope, and the conversations, you know, are starting slow, but we've got another 3+ years to figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in Vermont's case with our original map, you know, that was a upfront investment. And then because we have state, you know, we're administering the state's plan, we had resources, consistent resources, not necessarily to maintain the website, but the program. And I'd say over the course of you know, our time with our website, we updated it after, you know, the next major investment was 10 years later, and there was some incremental, you know, maintenance costs along the way. but yeah, I think those costs can accelerate or be more costly than you anticipate if what you launch with does not quite fit user needs. And I think that's a tricky element to manage. And I think that's, Josh kind of describing the slow growth approach, and it is an interesting one because it allows for, I think, avoiding, what can be kind of these like balloon costs that suddenly appear with projects that start off at a very large scale or launch at a large scale. So yeah, I think that is an important consideration of what those periodic costs could be, and depending on the platform you're on and security updates and things like that, major updates do cost money. And then just to Lynn's comment, I think this is something we're thinking a lot about, and food hubs are thinking a lot about. And if there is a service being provided, say like a brokerage element to a resource like this, there still is like these things are being developed because small businesses have trouble paying market rate, but there's still a value that I think should be paid for. It is serving kind of a market function. So that's another thing I think to potentially navigate. That's never going to cover the full operational cost, but I think that needs to be considered as part of like what is the funding model.
Yeah.
Something certainly we will explore. I'll just say one other thing briefly is that the Local Food Switchboard is fulfilling a gap in Maine that other state departments have. So all other state departments in New England received RFSI funds for local food coordination within the State Department. Maine does not have that for some reason. And so this is filling a gap that is unique, right, in New England. And so hopefully that will be some kind of leverage to keep this going throughout time and partner with the state to fill that gap.
And I also just want to say, we are exploring all models. And Heather, I'm not sure if you were going to speak to this. I just saw your hand go up when the sustainability question came up, but we had a great session at the Principal 6 conference 2 weekends ago that was exploring cooperative models. Like you were saying, Jake, this does have a market. There are people who find value in this. And so, exploring different ways that we can tap into that sustainably through potentially a cooperative model. I do want to go in order of our hands here. Can we go Elise, then Heather, and then Annie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Elise Neidecker. I'm with the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Super exciting to hear about the progress of this project and also hear from our panelists. This is such a fascinating whole world to me, and I work on RFSI in Maine, so very much related to my work. I'm curious if Jake or Josh wanted to say a little bit more. I think Jake mentioned the software that you're using. Basically, I'm curious about the question around how to make decisions around where to put new cold storage facilities or create distribution routes, like how those decisions are made using these tools. And Jake, I think you mentioned with the software that you're using that kind of has some analysis power in it, and just would love to hear more from others about kind of how those decisions are made or plan to be made with the switchboard, for example, too.
Yeah, I'm glad this is a question, because one of the things that I didn't answer was around like data collection challenges and so in order to like answer that type of question of where should cold storage go, or how to develop a route to service this market, that is where the data requirements start to get more intense. And not, I mean, it's still not in a inconceivable way, but if you lack the systems, like for the food hubs, for instance, like if they lack the systems to periodically like have an efficient way to update information around when are we making deliveries, how much, like what's the payload that we're delivering and the value of that shipment. You know, if all of that information is through like paper-based data and requires a lot of entry, that's where these kind of tools start to slow, like the power that they have starts to slow down. But that's what they're utilizing is basically information about flows through channels to certain points. And then they can use that information. You can then pose like a question to say, if that flow changes by X%, or if new supply comes on board near this, in this area, how would that change the network of distribution, storage, market access? So it does need certain types of information and specifically like tied to a route or a cluster or of farms or a location. And yeah, and that's where it gets a little more complicated of like, what do we actually have access? What can we get? What can our stakeholders provide? And so that can limit like the type of analysis that you can do. But yeah, the key pieces to that are like volumes, like times associated with delivery, and then your potential like new sources of supply or markets that you'd like to serve, or existing markets that you'd like to deliver more to. And yeah, there's a lot of like back end mathematical computation that happens. It's all related to like network science, and running like iterations of spatially, where do these things need to be located in relation to one another to efficiently and effectively deliver that change of volume to a new place, or what kind of supply is required to make that happen. So yeah, so there is a date, like you start to ramp up sort of the needed data to run scenarios like that. And we're kind of like feeling our way through that right now. And just a quick example, like route optimization. We have all the routes and like delivery times, but then there's a question of, can you change the sequence of these deliveries if one of them is like a farm pickup that needs to be delivered to a retailer down the delivery line? So like the model can give you an output that says like, this is the most efficient route to run. And then the food hubs are like, but that we can't actually do that because, our sequence is in a particular order because of how things need to flow. In other cases, that's not true. And they're like, oh, wow, yeah, like that's a real savings for us. But so you start to get into then to like constraints that you have to figure out and place onto the tool. If that makes sense.
I might follow up on Jake's response with a pretty different response. So it sounds like Jake's response is a sort of a technical approach to coordination. The platform that we have is not set up to be that. And I would say it's more of a relational approach to coordination. So there are people who become members of our network, and it's through those relationships that business to business coordination is happening. But we also think there's this opportunity for us to play a role in facilitating some of that coordination. And to give you a concrete example, we were just a couple of weeks ago in Kodiak for the Alaska Food Policy Council's annual Food System Summit. And we had a side conversation with some of the network members and a couple of seafood harvesters who are not part of our network, who are based in Kodiak, that are doing direct to consumer sales of seafood. It turns out that Kodiak is a long ways from anything. And so the way that works is that individual businesses are overnighting product down to Seattle. Cold storage is a frozen product, and on Alaska Airlines, and then getting it into their distribution channels out to customers. It's something like $2 a pound on overnight Alaska Airlines. And they have to do that because of the volume that they're working with. But aggregated, they could potentially use a barging system that's 70 cents a pound, but no one is coordinating that. And so that's a huge margin. That's huge, not just for the business, but also for the consumer too. And so if there's a mechanism, there's some sort of coordination like capacity to say, all of you collectively are distributing enough product down to get a freight container, you could save $1.30 a pound on your product. And that's just a massive amount of savings. And that's not going to be we're not going to use our mapping feature to figure that out. But through the relationships that people are building, we know already independently, business to business, people are starting to say, hey, I need salmon, and you're based in salmon and you're part of our network, and calling people up on the phone or going in, visiting them and figuring out how to make business arrangements. But I think there's this like additional layer down the line where we could play a role, and an organization like this could too, to say like, there's some cost savings through aggregation that you can do, maintaining chain of custody, maintaining product quality, maintaining independent brands, but that work that an individual business may not be well set up to do. So I think there's a lot of space in there to add value to small scale businesses. So yeah, it's a great question.
I'd love to make a connection real quick to probably leave this door open, but yesterday on our panel, and this is back to like where to place the storage, cold storage, part of Elise's question. On our panel, Ethan Miller from Land and Common, which is a land redistribution organization, said that, when you take wealth out of the picture of like who can pay the highest price for land, then it gets really complex and really tricky of how to choose who cares for and lives on, tends what land, right? And I think we could probably learn from land redistribution organizations and efforts in our effort to decide, like there's a lot more factors with cold storage, like Jake was saying, and Josh, more like data and things to think about, but it also, I imagine, is a little bit tricky because it's not like, all right, who's going to pay for this cold storage? Who wants it? Who's got the money for it? We're going to have to figure out like it's going to be more complex than that between the data and like how do you decide, right? Without just the money being shown. So that could be really interesting. Talk to some redistribution efforts.
Annie, I think you're up anyway. Do you want to ask your question or share your reflection?
Yeah, I'm going to respond to, sorry, Catherine, your question in the text, just to explain what I meant by culture shifting. And I forgot when you brought something up, Alita, that I wrote in the chat, culture shifting. But I want to respond, and then maybe like real briefly, if Josh and Jake can respond to my response, would be great. So I also see this project as an effort to shift culture towards more cooperation, more collaboration. So many people have their own equipment across Maine, their own infrastructure, whether it's tractors or cold storage or flash freezers. And this project is at its foundation, it's like working to shift so that those with capital, those with privilege, historically and currently, to own this infrastructure and equipment are encouraged to share it, so that our economy is moving towards a solidarity economy, shared economy. And maybe someday that becomes cooperatives with a big C, but also even if it's cooperatives with a small c, we're doing what we need to do so that those without that kind of privilege to have their own infrastructure can have access to it and benefit from what is there already. And that is tricky. That is deep relationship building. There's gonna be real tough stuff going on with that and the dynamics and the power dynamics. But I'm hoping we can make some small shifts, slow and steady, towards an economy and communities that are more collaborative in nature. So I don't know, Jake and Josh, if you have any like quick stories, like have you seen that happen in your work, in your efforts? Is this just pie in the sky? I'd love to hear from you.
I'll go because I just wanted to follow up on what Josh just previously said too, because I think it relates that any of these things can have varying degrees of, you know, technical capacities and processing power, but it's nothing without the relationships and this speaking to Annie, this piece around culture shift, and I think creating more transparency and access, and the ability for people to find one another. I think that's what all of these initiatives and projects are about. And I think always keeping that at centered and at the core of the work is like, so when Josh, you were saying that, I was like, yeah, like that's really the reason that we're involved in this. And yeah, so not losing sight of that, because I think it can in turn become overly technical, or you're pursuing something that is actually not meeting the needs of, the community that you're trying to help. Or so these can, and so like this type of mapping and these kinds of projects can be really helpful ways to bring people together, to bring these connections, to bring transparency and access to resources, and just a culture of openness. And we've seen that in Vermont, like over time with our network, and then with this very targeted project with the food hubs, like, I mean, they have collaborative relationships. They're very open to working with one another, but it's opening them up even more to consider, how do they work together as like a whole, and not just think of themselves as individual entities that are fulfilling a mission and trying to find funding and like all of those things. So we're starting to see actually them really develop like collaborative messaging and how they can represent themselves and their different scales and interests together. And and that's really powerful. And all of that too is in service of helping, the farms and food producers that are based in their regions. And so it all kind of starts then connecting in really interesting ways from there. So so I think that's just I think to leave with anything is just keeping in mind, like, why are we doing this, and how can this help build these relationships, or build upon the relationships that we know exist, and we want to continue and be healthy and thriving. That speaks to me. But there is culture shift with all of this, sometimes in ways that we didn't expect, even challenging our own assumptions about, or realizing we have certain assumptions that maybe we didn't realize we had going into this kind of work. So but that's really important. It opens up those questions, and I think it's great to kind of be in a community that is working towards that.
So good to hear, Jake. Lots of stories to come, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to end this session. Your comment made me think of a couple things. For the last 18 months, we've been working on what we're calling this National Action Plan for strengthening local and regional seafood systems, and it's been a really big, sprawling effort that has involved a lot of different components, a set of case studies, a set of these amazing focus groups that we did, an in-person, like very creative workshop, et cetera, et cetera. And we're in the process of bringing all those different pieces together right now. And one of the four pathways of change that have been identified through this work is around shared infrastructure to support community-based seafood systems. So I think you're onto something in that way. On a personal note, I've had the privilege of helping to start a couple seafood co-ops over the last 10 years. And I think my observation from that work is that we need to not just be investing in the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure to facilitate those and the legal infrastructure, but we need to invest in the soft infrastructure too. How do people show up in meetings? How do people deal with conflict? How do people deal with these really messy things, right? Like political differences, et cetera. And I think that's often forgotten. Like it's really easy to build a map. Like that's kind of a theme of this conversation. And it's really, really hard to build trust. It's really, really, really hard. And I think if we're gonna move the needle, we need to be thinking about that soft infrastructure too.
You are speaking my language, Josh. Thank you so much.
Yeah, beautiful place to end this conversation right on the dot. Thank you all for hanging in here for 2 hours. I hope that it's been informative and just wet your whistle. You know, there's more to come on this. And again, invite you all to the in-person Convergence on the 29th. Stay in touch. Check out our website. And thank you all again for showing up tonight and doing the work that you all do in the food system.
Thank you, Alita. That was amazing.